we have the Los Angeles Rams and Matthew Stafford going back home to take on the Detroit Lions, who host a playoff game. Won the division for the first time since the early Barry Sanders administration. It is a 3-point game. Detroit favored by 3, so effectively just the home field advantage. Where are you going?
Yep. So, well, I'm taking Rams +3, but that's the end of the segment. But we'll get there. We'll get there. So, first of all, this is like the narrative game of the week. I have no affiliation with either organization. I think I might be like quietly just having a tear roll down my cheek as Stafford runs out onto Ford Field. I just don't love this matchup for Detroit. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson's been phenomenal, and they do get back Aleem McNeil and probably James Houston. But Rob Havenstein's a solid right tackle where we get most of Hutchinson's reps. He does move around, play on the inside, etc. But I think they'll be able to do enough to hold up. I'm sure you'll see a lot of Kyron Williams kept in to pass protect. He's a great pass blocking running back. And I just worry about Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua against this secondary. However, the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson element is interesting. I could see him play as a full-time slot. They have plenty of safeties, with Branch and Kirby Joseph and Tracy Walker and all those guys. I guess Branch could play in the slot as well. But Detroit has been terrible this year against slot receivers, bottom 5 in the NFL in pretty much every metric. But maybe Chauncey Gardner-Johnson does change that. But nevertheless, I just think the Rams are going to be able to score a lot of points here. And while I do think Detroit will as well, so the over here, 51.5, I think we could have a very high-scoring game here. I just think the Rams make enough plays. And last but not least, no one knows Jared Goff's weak points more than Sean McVay.
Oh man, if Jared Goff gets like out schemed by him, if McVay puts Goff into hell and he just like, see, I told you, this is why I had to go away from you. I knew you don't have the stones to make it happen when I needed it. My guy over here, Stafford, has. That would be a brutal beatdown from Jared Goff. Like, that's awful. It does kind of, I agree with you. I think this will be a high-scoring game. I think both offenses have the capacity to put up points. And it is going to be like, which one do you have more confidence in, Stafford or Goff? And even though they've had, I think, vaguely comparable seasons this year, like, they're very close together in PFF grades. Stafford's at 85.9, Goff's at 84.4. Stafford has a wildly higher big-time throw rate, but they've both averaged 7.6 yards per attempt. Jared Goff has had much more volume, has had more sort of efficiency in terms of completion rate, all those kinds of things. But I think generally they've had quite similar years. But you have, I think, way more confidence that Stafford won't melt down in the game than you do with Goff. And, you can argue that Jared Goff had effectively an MVP caliber year outside of like 4 games where he was terrible, And but those happened. And you're like, if those happen again, the Lions are screwed. They're not winning a game. Like, they had a run where he had 3 games in 4 outings that were 47.6 PFF grade against Chicago, 52.7 the next week against Green Bay. Then he had a reasonable game against the Saints, and then again Chicago, 44.8. Those are terrible games, and he can't have that kind of performance if they want to beat the Rams.
No, definitely not. And look, the Rams, Raheem Morris has done a great job, but they obviously are not the most loaded unit on defense. Of course, you'll get Aaron Donald, and I think you can pick on Jonah Jackson and Graham Glasgow on the interior a little bit. Frank Ragnow's great, but it always kind of seems to be dealing with something. But it's obviously a very, very good offensive line. But I think Aaron Donald's still going to get his. The one thing that makes it interesting is the Lions' run defense is pretty considerably better than the Rams' run defense. And I think both these teams are going to want to run the ball a ton. McVay has gone back to a very, very high, run rate, and then it sets up a lot of the, not as much play action as the Goff days, but a lot of gap and inside zone and a different run scheme, and then taking shots out of shotgun with Stafford in this kind of new high flying offense. But the Lions' run defense is really, really good, so that will be interesting if maybe they're getting in too many second and long, third and longs. Whereas the flip side, I think Ben Johnson's going to try to run the ball 40 combined times with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery if he can. Obviously, if the game script is negative, then he can't do that. But I imagine that's his approach. Say, hey, I want to win a game where Jared goes 17 of 25 for 240 and a touchdown. Like that's what we're like. That's a good outcome for us. If it's a gunslinging battle, like you said, I think we both land in the same bucket.
Though it is worth noting that this is by far the lowest turnover-worthy play rate of Matthew Stafford's career. Like, I still think you have to have more confidence in his ability to not melt down than Jared Goff's. But Stafford always kind of had the reputation of a guy that's going to give you one at some point in the game. And then, throughout his career, and has really cleaned that up this year. Like, he hasn't done that much, if at all. His turnover-worthy play rate is one of the best in the NFL. He has 12 all season long, and that's resulted in 11 interceptions. Like, he's had incredibly low turnover-worthy play numbers and has actually been quite unlucky with interceptions. I mean, is he just having a really good year this year, or is he due a bad game where he has a couple of turnover-worthy plays?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point. And we keep saying like kind of these buzzwords and cliches, but like to put some data behind it, like, and again, these things I'm not saying are stable, but like Matthew Stafford on 3rd and 4th down this year, 87 of 139, 1,090 yards, 12 touchdowns to 1 pick. It's kind of the one split where Jared Goff's hasn't been quite as good. 109 of 174, 1150, 10 touchdowns, but 6 picks. And if you go back and look at some of those turnovers on 3rd and 4th down, like, it's forcing things in some of those ugly games you pointed out. I think 2 of them were against Baltimore, which I know Baltimore kind of embarrassed every quarterback they played, or most of them. But in a lot of those high leverage moments, it just, like, that's where the issues pop up. They've both been phenomenal in the red zone once they get down there. But I just think the 3rd and longs and stuff like that, it just, yeah, like you said, it's maybe we're due for some regression on the turnover-worthy plays. But I worry more about Jared Goff.
Yeah, and by the way, 3 of his turnover-worthy plays came in that final game he played against the Giants, where the Rams just weren't right and they couldn't seem to function. Obviously, he sat out the final week of the season and Carson Wentz was in there. But like the last game Stafford played, he had 3 turnover-worthy plays in the game, and that accounts for a quarter of his season, that one performance. So it is a slightly weird dynamic here where you're like, well, I definitely have more faith in Stafford to not implode than Goff, but like the last game, Stafford kind of imploded. Like we saw, it's within the range of outcomes in any given Matthew Stafford game is for him to go a little bit crazy. Even the Super Bowl run they went on, right? Like we sort of forget he was incredible in the postseason, way better than in the regular season where his numbers were nuts. But even in like against Tampa Bay, he tried to throw that away in the end zone before he went on the run and like did the crazy thing. So I think that's one element that people are kind of ignoring is that Stafford has always had that tendency to, maybe give you an opportunity that you wouldn't get otherwise because of how sort of gung-ho and potentially reckless / aggressive he is with the ball.
Oh, very good point. Very good point. I guess the last thing, got to throw it in. You mentioned how the Rams sat their guys, which looks genius in hindsight. They've always been about rest. They kind of led the front of not playing in the preseason. They still get the 6th seed anyway after not playing anybody. The Lions are not going to have Khalif Raymond, and I'm guessing here, but I don't think Sam Laporta is going to play in this game either. He might. We'll see. He will not be 100% healthy if he does play. And that's, 2 guys that are top 5 in, receiving options. Laporta's 2nd, and I would imagine Raymond's behind Josh Reynolds, maybe 4th. Like, or I guess Jameson Williams. Anyway, bad radio. But, like, those are meaningful losses. I mean, Raymond in special teams and as a receiver, explosive play guy. And, of course, Laporta is that 3rd down outlet. He's always the target, it seems like, on a lot of those high-leverage downs. It's a huge potential loss. Just makes things so much easier. Amon-Ra is amazing, but it makes things a lot easier for the Rams.
No, it's a really good point to bring up. Like 2 opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how to treat those dead games at the end of the season. The Rams have always, whether it's preseason or whether it's a game like this, treated it as like nobody of consequence is playing in those games. Like we are going to play a full backup roster and try and get out of it with nobody at risk. Whereas the Lions were like, we're going to ride this momentum. We're going to play the starters. We're going to, push into the postseason and try and ride this wave of us against the world siege mentality that manifests off the back of that Dallas game where they got screwed with the ridiculous play at the end. And it cost them. I mean, they lost Sam Laporta in that game. And I agree with you. I don't think he plays. And even if he does, it's not going to look like Sam Laporta. I mean, it's effectively the same injury that Travis Kelce suffered before the season. And even when he came back, it didn't look like Travis Kelce for a couple of weeks. So, yeah, a huge potential loss for Detroit and kind of showed you the reason that a lot of teams don't want to risk anybody in those games. So, okay, you said you were going with the Rams. Steve is also taking the Rams. I'm going to buy into the Lions. I've been impressed by them this season. I do think they are still riding something of a wave of us against the world mentality. I think in particular, I think they're aware of the narrative. They do not want to get their pants pulled down by Matthew Stafford coming home for the first time they're hosting a playoff game since, the early 90s. They don't want that to happen. I feel like they're going to get it done, and they're going to find a way to win, even with a 3-point margin.